What if the key to breakthrough innovation isn't just having a great idea, but finding the right partner to bring it to life? Today, we're diving into the transformative power of strategic university partnerships. I'm thrilled to share insights from our webinar, Identifying a Strategic University Partner, where we explore how collaborations with researchers can accelerate your product development, unlock specialized resources, and open doors to funding opportunities.
I'm really delighted today to have just a fantastic pair to share with you their experience and their journey. So I've got Cameron van den Dungen joining us, who is the CEO and founder of Sleep Tight. You may have heard of Sleep Tight. They've won lots of awards. They are a deep tech company that has partnered with RMIT to develop technology for managing sleep in aged care. I'm also delighted to have joining us Sleep Tight's Director of Research and Development, Dr. Andrew Tucker, who's come out of the CRC community as well and has experience both on the research side and the industry side. And when we get through the presentation today, you're going to see why that is so important. Today's session, I'm really delighted to be bringing you a session that is really delving into what it takes to build a strategic partnership with researchers and universities. This is about the transformative potential of strategic partnerships. This is about collaborations that aren't just about accessing the benefits of research. They're about embedding your business in a network of innovation and access to those resources, both intellectual and physical resources that come from a really great strategic partnership with a university. Building a successful partnership can enable you to accelerate breakthrough in product development, provide you with access to specialised equipment and facilities, to new ideas and ways of approaching problems, and to open doors to potentially joint government grants and funding. It can really help scale your business. And the core of today's session is going to be the experience of Sleep Tight. I'm going to give you a bit of, a framework to understand how to build one of these relationships. But then we're going to bring that framework to light for the fantastic experience of Sleep Tight. And one of the things that you'll see as we go through this is it's not a straightforward journey. There's always going to be twists and winds in the road. And I can see Cameron smiling as I say that. Those twists and winds in the road are why some of the things in the framework we're going to go through this morning are so important to have in place, because they'll help you manage them really well and ensure that you're still getting the benefit from a relationship, a strategic relationship, even when things are not quite going as you expected. The flip side of things not going quite as expected is that you may discover ideas that you might not have even entertained or thought would be possible when you started. The framework piece of it will be the partnership objectives. I'll spend 5 minutes on that. Then I've got 6 core questions, which really help to frame how you might want to think about a strategic partnership. But then we'll get to the real meat of this webinar, which is the discussion with Andrew and Cameron from Sleep Tight. So let's start with partnership objectives. This is about knowing what you need to know from the beginning, where it sits in your business strategy, setting clear objectives, and understanding what your end goal is. When you engage with a university or with researchers, you're accessing a huge pool of talent, but it's an environment that operates very differently from a business. So it's worth thinking through what it is you need from the relationship before you start. So I'm going to just do a quick recap for those who weren't at the last session, and apologies for those who were, just a little bit on universities in Australia for those who might have missed that. We're very blessed in Australia to have an incredibly rich research environment and very high performing universities. New Zealand also has that same benefit, with 2 countries with remarkably high performing research institutions. It's worth knowing that the university system in Australia is that all Australian universities are not the same. They all have different cultures, strengths, characters. You may have heard terms like the Group of 8, the Australian Technology Network of Universities, the Rural Universities Network, the Innovative Research Universities. Those are all university groupings and they're signals to the different cultures and priorities of universities. So for some universities, their focus is on that really deep, long-term fundamental research. That fundamental research is critical. So fundamental research doesn't always know where it's going to land in the end. It's curiosity driven, but it's often where some of our biggest breakthroughs occur. So for instance, research in radio telescopy is what got us Wi-Fi. And we wouldn't be running this webinar without Wi-Fi today. So that's what fundamental research does. Other institutions are more focused on translation and utilisation of research, the commercialisation of research, applied research. So depending where it is that you need to engage with research, you've got to understand those different characters. And it's really worth spending some time getting to understand what would align with your needs. But there's some real strengths that universities offer for you. And I know at first glance, when you go to engage with a university, it can look really confusing. They're very big institutions. These are often institutions with tens of thousands of people as part of them, massive budgets, but don't be intimidated. If you think about it as they're a bunch of people and really what you're trying to find is the right people for you to work with, it's much less intimidating. But they offer some really important things for you. We all know that universities help generate our next generation talent. They are training people at undergraduate level and at research level in order to develop their talent. They're a great source for you to engage with as you're building your workforce and you're accessing that talent. They're places of great creativity. And match with that is autonomy, which is something I always include in our webinars because there's a higher degree of autonomy in a university than there is in a business environment. And that's part of the creativity of an institution. Our academic colleagues need that freedom to be able to explore really complex ideas and questions and see where it takes them. They have great research infrastructure. Australia's universities are home to some amazing kit. They are the host of the National Critical Research Infrastructure in Australia, much of which is accessible to businesses through their universities. And so we have everything from telescopes to maker spaces. So depending on where your interests lie, you may find that there is a research infrastructure that can help support you and the expertise that knows how to use it. And of course, the most important strength of universities in this context is their research expertise. You'll understand how to design your business questions. You'll know the questions that are driving you in business. One of the great strengths of university and academics is that they are able to design research questions to identify where we might discover new knowledge or how we might use knowledge that we have in a unique and novel way. So, what might a strategic partnership look like? There's no one type of partnership. It might start off in a smaller area. It might be something that is joint research and development projects. When we go to the Sleep Tight example, you actually see they cover lots of these different parts of a strategic partnership. It might mean that you have embedded team members in the university or vice versa, that you're bringing people from the university into your business. It may include PhD student placements or projects at all levels. Students are always keen for industry experience. The flip side of that is you're bringing talent into business and people curious to solve problems. It might involve shared research centres or facilities. It's a little bit different to a strategic, what we're talking about today. And just to clarify, the strategic partnership is a bit different to contract research or consulting, where you've defined a problem or defined something that you need and you've gone to a university or vice versa. They've come to you to help solve it. That's not to say that isn't often where strategic partnerships start from. It may be how you start developing a relationship. So, where do you start when you want to do this? Starting at the beginning is always the good point, a good place. Be clear about what your what, why, how, and when is. And when we get to the discussion with sleep type, you're going to see that some of this can evolve over time and probably will evolve. But knowing what your what is really important. Your why is really important. Your how and when may possibly shift as part of that partnership and that engagement. Seeking mentors is really important. There are lots of people who have been engaged with research institutions before you. They've learnt along the way. You're participating in this webinar. You're going to hear from Cameron and Andrew. This is one of the ways that you get yourself well prepared to take that plunge. Be prepared to be flexible. Now, that may seem in conflict with the what, why, how, and when. And Andrew and Cameron will talk a little bit to how the how and when can sometimes flex a bit in these relationships. It means being a bit open to possibilities that you might not have imagined. One of the great benefits of a strategic partnership with researchers is they're going to see things you don't see, and they're going to open your mind to ideas that you might not have previously thought about. And you are going to do the same for them. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Ask the right questions. We're going to actually set out 6 questions that you need to be thinking about, but asking those questions and not being afraid to ask them. Universities, it's one of the characteristics of university life is there's a lot of debate, discussion, and questioning. So it's going to be expected when you engage. And the other really important thing, and this was advice from Andrew, is network and talk to people, go to conferences, participate in seminars, go and see who's doing what, invite researchers to industry conferences. And if you're a researcher, go along to industry conferences. It's a really good idea and a good way to build that network and get to understand who is in there. I wanted to share this because it was some really interesting work done by Deloitte in August 2022 about higher education and industry partnering for impact. And they really looked at and studied what the basis of a great partnership was in the Australian context. What I thought was really interesting about it is it drew out what those really important parts of a partnership are, and we'll explore some of those with Cameron and Andrew. So it has in it, of course, cultural and values alignment, potential for a broad partnership. Geographic proximity comes into it. It may not be the driver for you, but you'll see there are benefits to it as well. Ranking and academic excellence are important. Clearly, you need to engage with a research organisation or researchers that are expert in the area of interest that you have. Commercial attractiveness, university infrastructure, alumni within organisations. Very often people are engaging with the organisation that they're an alumni. It can be a great starting point. It might not be your end point, but it could be a great starting point. And of course, universities have very wide networks and connections as well, which can be a real benefit for you. So now I'm going to go to the 6 core questions, which I think are really worth doing. This is drawn from work done by MIT. There's an institution that is very deeply engaged in industry partnerships and research. But researchers at the MIT Sloan School of Management did some deep research and identified 6 questions that were common amongst businesses that had built successful partnerships with universities. Now, of course, they're United States ones, so what I've taken liberty of doing is modifying these for an Australian context. However, they drew this data from a really rich source of both small and medium enterprises, but also big businesses who have developed very long run partnerships with universities. For instance, there's a long run strategic partnership between Oxford University and and Rolls-Royce that has really benefited both. They've looked at partnerships that organisations, high-tech businesses like Google have developed as well. So it helps to clarify what those cores are. So with the first one, core questions. So the first question is, what business goals drive your research partnership? And they can be multiple ones. They might be short-term incremental solving problem. You might be well along the path, but you need to work with some researchers to do that. Talent identification and hiring. You might be looking for talent to build your R&D capacity. That might be within your organisation, or it might be in partnership with the institution, from undergrads right through to PhD scholars and high degree research scholars and postdocs. It may have a long-term view of new development of technologies. That's a sort of grand challenges or deep exploration for new technologies and new product lines. It may be for you that you're already operating in space, but you want exposure to new ideas and new possibilities, and that could be exposure to a startup pipeline. Universities are very rich sources of this. It may be, and this is a piece that isn't often talked about, profile and influence. Partnering with a university can help lift your business. I see Sleep Tight doing this really, really well. You're linking into the capacity and the reputation of the university and the researchers, and that's lending benefit to you as well as you giving benefit to them. That profile and influence is something that I think is forgotten often, but is particularly worth thinking about when you're thinking about who and how you might partner. The next core question is what are the key focus areas for your research partnerships? So it's taking it down to the next level. And how are you going to select them to ensure they align with your goals? You might be after technical capability and expertise, and then that will help you work through how you engage. Or you might have challenge areas that have emerged in your business that you're not quite sure how to address. Or you might have particular product domains that you're looking to engage with. There are many different ways that you want to focus, but thinking about those focuses will help you make good decisions and have good conversations in the co-design process. Question number 3 is, what are your criteria for selecting a research partner? Universities have criteria when they think about how they engage with businesses. Researchers have you've got to remember the freedom of researchers. Your partnership may grow out of a relationship with researchers, and that's what's happened in the case of Sleep Tight. But you need to be clear too on what your criteria are. You need to have a mutual understanding of the problem to solve. So sitting down and having those conversations and figuring out if you understand where each of you are coming from is really important. Familiarity and fit, knowing how you can work together. This is not going to be a straight line. So having that familiarity and fit will help you resolve any challenges. Location, is location important to you? Do you need a research partner that's nearby, or are you able to travel? Expertise, excellence, and reputation, really important. You need them to be expert in what the problems that you're solving. Reputation does matter, particularly when you're thinking about that profile and influence. Legal framework, I have bolded this, and I've bolded it because Cameron kept emphasising when we've been talking about this prior, is getting the IP up front is really important. Thinking about that legal framework is really important. Research institutions have legal frameworks. It's worth knowing that you can have a discussion with them about that legal framework, working with your research partners, but you've got to agree on what that is up front. It is one of those things that you potentially are repenting at leisure if you don't get right from the upfront, and be prepared to have that conversation up front is important. Culture is really important. You have a culture to your business. Does the culture of the research organisation enhance that culture? Does it match that culture? Does it reflect that culture, or does it nicely complement that culture? Those questions are important for you to think about. The next core question for you to think about is, what collaboration formats suit your priorities? So you've thought about what your priorities are. There are many different ways of doing it. So it might be that you start off with partnering with a single research group, that you've found a research group you want to work with. That may grow into a larger research partnership. It may grow into co-developed research centres. It may grow into joint applications for funding. But think about where you start. It may be the embedded employees. We talked about having either your people in the university or vice versa. It may be part of a consortium membership. CRCs, for instance, in Australia are essentially consortia. It's where a group of businesses have teamed up together with a group of research organisations to address some particular industry challenges. That is how that partnership operates. It has a framework that it operates in. They are 10-year commitments, so they can be very long-term commitments. Or it may be that you're part of a smaller consortia. You may want to co-develop some research centres or some research programs, but you may also want to engage in fellowships, scholarships, competitions, grants, hackathons, all sorts of different things. The shape of and the formats are really something for you to work out together with your industry partner. Question number 5. What people, processes, and governance are going to support your research partnerships? This goes back to some of those earlier questions that we asked. What is the research translation capability within your organisation? What do you need to bring in? Talking to Cameron and Andrew earlier, this is actually a really pertinent question. Research organisations and businesses talk a different language. How will you translate between those languages? How will you be able to make sure that you understand each other? What expertise do you need to support that? How will you do co-design? Will you be able to co-design things together? How will you find the common ground? What technical and legal expertise do you need as you develop? And then what's the governance framework that underpins it? It's got some really interesting lessons from that I think are incredibly positive about using your governance structures to both build the business's understanding of research and the value of R&D, but also build the research partner's understanding of the drivers for business. Governance can actually be a superpower in this space. Now, the 6th question is, what KPIs are useful, and how will you evaluate them? Think about the KPIs that are going to work for both of you. They may be around effectiveness, timeliness, efficiency in delivering a solution. It might be around talent identification, the performance of that talent over time, or it might be around grant applications. It might be around patents. There's a whole heap of different things that you can do. I haven't put dot points there because they all depend on the answers that you have to the previous 5 questions. Finally, we get to the building a lasting partnership, and this is a very short one because we're going to get to a discussion about a lasting partnership with one that has happened. So, the elements of a successful research partnership. And I really thank Andrew and Cameron for their contribution to this, because this has really come out of discussions with them and come out of discussions with many of the businesses that CRA has engaged with over the years. Clarity of business and research goals, really making sure you both understand them is important, which then leads to alignment of those goals and alignment on the KPIs and agreement on the KPIs. Having your appropriate IP, legal and governance arrangements in place is your fundamental building block for doing that. The mutual value add, you both benefit from these partnerships, and seeing that from the outset will help you build a really successful partnership. Having champions in your business and champions in the institution are really useful. You'll have champions that are your research leads, but you also will be looking for champions within the administration of a research organisation to help you navigate through that incredibly complex and very large place that it is. This, I think, is really important. I think Sleep Tight just does this so well. They make sure that they're entering competitions. They make sure they're celebrating achievements, large and small. If you hop onto LinkedIn and look at the achievements of Sleep Tight, you see lots of celebration of the researchers, of the business team, of the collaboration as a whole. Celebrating means that you're building that culture together and building that success together and building a long-term partnership together. I've included a slide on programs and funding just because I know we get questions on it in every session. So I just wanted to make sure that people know there are programs and funding that, as you build a strategic partnership, are accessible to you. And these are programs that really do support those partnerships, those strategic partnerships. So from the Australian Research Council, which is more at the university-led end, you get access to linkage grants and industry transformation centres, etc. From the Department of Education, trailblazers sitting within universities are designed to help commercialise ideas. The Economic Accelerator provides some funding, and the Industry PhD program is a great way if you're trying to tap into talent and build talent both ways. It supports PhD scholars to go into businesses, but also supports people in business to go into PhD programs. The Department of Industry, Science and Research has very industry-focused programs. So the Cooperative Research Centres program, CRC projects, the Industry Growth Fund has just gone live, but these things support those collaboration. And there are also lots of great state-based funding programs for industry. So in Victoria, for instance, there's a Victorian Medical Research Acceleration Fund, and these are often co-funding agreements, and you'll find this too with a lot of the industry programs. Co-funding agreements, so you have to have the capital to fund, but they're non-dilutive, so the business retains the IP and you can do the R&D, as Andrew says, for half the cost, which is always a great outcome for anyone. So that gives you a bit of a framework and some background, and now I'm really delighted to introduce you to our colleagues from Sleep Tight, Cameron and Andrew, to talk a little bit about the experience of Sleep Tight. The first screen I'm going to pop up there is actually the graphic giving you a bit of an idea of the technology that they've built this company on. I'm going to finish later on with a slide that shows the celebration and the people that make the team. But I really want to throw over to Cameron and Andrew now to bring this whole story to life. So Cameron, do you want to kick off with telling us a bit about the Sleep Tight story, where it began and what that ambition is?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jane. Hopefully you can hear me. Is everyone able to hear me? Just making sure I'm just technical before I get into it. So thank you for having me along, and Andy as well. Andy's critical in this discussion because Andy did come out of the CRC world. But Jane, what you've summarised leading into this almost sums up exactly our journey of Sleep Tight. I probably wish I had sat through a presentation like this before I started my journey with Sleep Tight all those years ago. But having said that, you are a product of your experiences. And as a result, I think we're better placed now because of the journey we've been on. But Sleep Tight started off realistically, in my world, it started off at about 2010 when I had an idea that I wanted to extract data out of a sleep-based environment. And I started working with the Australian Institute of Sport, and I started working with different elements on this idea of how do we better understand what is happening when people sleep, and not doing it through wearables, because wearables for me was a challenge in that you always had to remember to wear it. And if you didn't remember to wear it, then the data became, I wouldn't say useless, but it didn't give you that long-term trending data. So I went on this journey from 2010 looking for a solution. And being a commercial person by background, my father was one of the founding members of 40 Weeks. I didn't want to create technology. I wanted to find technology existed globally and then use it for the purposes I wanted. But everywhere I went in the world, no one was working on a system of non-invasive, as in nearable technology to extract data in a sleep environment. Very difficult area to do it. Normally it was under bed and the quality of data wasn't great. So fast forward to about 2015, 2016, I was the president of the Old Haileyburyans Association, and I gave an award to a long-term member of the community who had a deep tie with the Australian Academy of Science. And when we sat down for coffee, after I gave him a very prestigious medal, I talked to him about my challenges and what I was trying to do in business. And he just happened to have been at a presentation of a young associate professor from RMIT called Madhu Bhaskaran. And Madhu had a solution that was 6 years old at that point in time, and she couldn't find an industry partner that was in printable, flexible, stretchable electronics. And Rob, with the Australian Academy of Science, made the connection. And from there, we worked together, and Madhu and I created the CRCP, and we ended up on a journey to deliver a technology that we'll talk about today. But it was more out of luck and chance, but it started with me asking questions and being open. And it started on Madhu's side, and we did a presentation jointly to APSI not that long ago that said we had a similar approach between the two of us, and that was being flexibility. Madhu didn't expect to be developing a bed-based sensor when she'd come out of a micro nano research facility. So that's the genesis of the idea. I think it's more about how the relationship began and how it's evolved to where it is now, 7 years after we started.
And I mean, the ambition now is Sleep Tight's a deep tech company, which means
deep tech. I didn't know what deep tech was until I went to the US and I got told you're a deep tech company. Essentially what it is using science, design, industry, and other capabilities to work together on a common goal to overcome something that is actually quite hard, and not just retrofitting another technology. And that's what we did here. So we took something out of a micro nano research facility that was meant to be a second skin, essentially, to monitor environmental sensors, and bringing in finished product manufacturers to the table with fundamental researchers, with me understanding the industry need and capability and being able to put that price point matrix over the top, and then creating a brand new patented, which we now hold a global patent on, or at least in most major developed markets, on a brand new process. So the Americans said, no, you are the quintessential, you're the pin-up child of deep tech and what it means. So now that we put the deep tech label on it, so more people understand what it is, even if I didn't 18 months ago.
Cameron. And so I think that there's an interesting question there, because you've built yourself essentially as a research company from the beginning, an R&D rich company from the beginning. And so how did it started with a coffee and it started with being open, which is great. What was your approach to finding the research partners or navigating into that relationship with the university? And what were some of the core questions you had from the outset as someone who hadn't really worked in that space before?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question, Jane. I'm going to segue in Andy partway through this so that we can lead into him nicely, because he was part of that journey, genuinely. He was in CRC land at that stage. The first question I asked RMIT, and actually even we'll take a step back from RMIT, when I was in those first meetings, I'd only just had coffee with Madhu. I was also looking at other bodies like CSIRO, and I'd started some preliminary discussions. Now, I won't knock CSIRO because my relationship with them has got stronger and stronger, and I unbelievably am appreciative of the work that organisation does. But their approach to IP ownership did not align with mine. So that goes back to your earlier discussion about understanding IP from the outset. And when I first started my conversations with CSIRO, I also very early on had appointed an IP law firm to represent me. And during coffees with them and asking, how does this work? Because you want to get trusted advisors around you that are in your team. Because if you don't have trusted advisors around you, you can get taken advantage of very easily in this category. And it's not just by research institutes, it is by everyone in the sector. It is a scary sector when you walk in blind because it is expensive in R&D. And if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it gets even more expensive. The first bit of advice I got was all discussions with CSIRO, because there wasn't because of CSIRO as an institute or as a research body. It was more that at the time, their stance on IP was you pay us and we'll own all the IP. We'll do the work. And they knew it didn't align with me. So I walked into my first meeting with RMIT, proper meeting, when we said, all right, how do we scope this out? So I sat down with them and said, okay, before we get going, what's your stance on IP ownership? And Sharaf's answer was the best answer I've ever heard and basically sealed the deal and a friendship from there. He said, we're simple. We need to get our technology out in the market. You pay more, you own more. You pay less, we own more. And I thought, commercial people, I don't mind that. It's a negotiation at that point in time and a very open collaboration. And that was when I went, these researchers are aligned with my views on life. If I can't afford it, they're willing to put some skin in the game to get a reward on the other end. But if I can pay a bit more, well, it's risk reward at the end of the day. That was that alignment for me. And from that moment, the friendship began. But I also went out, and this is where I'm going to segue Andy in. I started meeting with people in the sector, and I got told, you've got to meet this guy, Andrew Tucker. He's working over at the Alertness CRC. And I think Andrew sometimes, even like today, and I'll talk about the stress he has to face at times. I went and sat with Andrew and he took a meeting with me. And I was going out to see the Turner, I think, at that stage, the Turner out of Monash Uni, just to understand sleep research and other things. And Andy became another trusted advisor. And off the end of that first coffee, when he was very open with me, and he gave more than he probably needed to, but I went, this is someone aligned with my values, aligned with my vision and what I want to achieve. And we stayed friends for 3 years. And I kept saying to him regularly, we're going to work together one day, Andy. We're going to work together one day. And the reason Andy was so critical is because he is essentially my translator between the research world, the industry world, and me with a founder mentality, which he will tell you is challenging at times to deal with. When the stress and pressure hits me, then it funnels down to Andy. And he said to me once early on, I'm not a technical person, Cam. And I go, I don't need a technical person, Andy. I need a translator that is cool, calm, and collected to almost be the barrier and filter between me being crazy and erratic and eccentric and wanting to go in a million directions and being calm and concise with our research partners and do the same across all platforms. So a coffee even led me to meet another trusted advisor that became a critical team member, and he took on the role of director of R&D, which I think is a nice little segue into the next part of this discussion.
Absolutely. Andy, what's your take? What was your experience of that? And you've come from a world where you were involved in those kind of consortia approaches to the partnerships.
Well, I guess, thanks, Jane, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And thanks, Cam. My forehead's a little bit higher and my hair's a little bit grey through this experience, but that's okay. I started the academic world, so I was always going to be a researcher. I finished my PhD and I kind of went, what now? And I didn't want to live on grants, so I ended up joining a startup company. And I had that research mentality. And I still remember my first CEO said, don't be such a scientist. And I went, like I was offended. I went, what? And what he meant was you've got to understand what this business wants and where it's going and what your role is. Yes, you're doing research here, but your role and the outputs that we need from you, different. And you need to understand that. So that was a steep learning curve for me. So then when I was interacting with researchers, I could tell them what I needed, but I also understood what they needed. So, researchers will need high impact publications, all of that kind of thing. They don't necessarily care about the commercial outcome, but the business generally does in the collaborations that I've been in. So that's really important to understand that cultural fit and the different, I guess, drivers. And if you can align those, then you're on a winner.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that actually leads into that next question, which is, I mean, you'd started, and Cameron, both of you have touched on this, the cultural fit, the alignment. You'd started with that. I noticed the use of that term friendship and cultural alignment. You're really identifying the intangible things that have helped make the partnership work. But I guess, what are the characteristics of your partnership with the RMIT team, when we think about, we've looked through those 6 questions, what are the elements that you think have been really critical to your success and your ability, particularly to get over any bumpy parts as you've gone through this journey of developing as a deep tech company?
There's two parts to the answer. I'll do the first part and Andy will do the second part, because there's the top line relationship and navigation you mentioned governance before, and I'll touch on that briefly in this point. And then there's the on the tools actual research piece that Andy has overseen. So there's two parts to that. One of the most significant benefits I got out of the RMIT relationship, and you mentioned champions early on. So Sharath and Madhu are research champions, incredibly smart, connected individuals within the space. I mean, Sharath's now the president of Science and Technology Australia. Madhu's one of the co-chairs, co-presidents of Women in STEM. She's an APTI fellow, first female winner of the, I think, Frederick White. She's won an APEC Aspire Prize. But they're incredible research leaders, and their networks are phenomenal. To talk about the administration, Claire Russell in the RMIT world and I've joked and called her the Grand Master. She is my first call when I need to navigate the university world. Sharath is probably the real first call, because Sharath, he understands it, and he and I have got a friendship. But Claire and I have a friendship. And we sat like proud parents recently at the National Press Club when Sharath gave his address there, and Claire and I were in the front row. If anyone was there, you'd see us sitting together, because Claire knows the challenges I face, and she's almost anticipated some of the things that were coming before I saw them coming. And she's put more support around me within the RMIT network that goes beyond just the project we're working on. This is the value. These are the champions. So Claire could see, and she even called me once and went, it's almost remiss of me if I don't make this next move for you. And she arranged some copy meetings for me with the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Callum Drummond. Callum Drummond had a history of translating or commercialising research breakthroughs into international markets. And off the back of that, Callum and I sat down. I restructured our entire business because of the advice Callum gave me. Alec Cameron, the Vice Chancellor of RMIT, he's come out and visited us, and we've brought ministers in to speak with him as well. And this is where that benefit comes about. But that doesn't happen unless you have a Claire Russell, working for you inside the network and connecting those dots. And then the flip on that is I've also made sure that in my advisory board, Sharath and Madhu sit on my advisory board with a very real purpose, because I need them to see, and Andy copped it this morning, but it was more, he saw the pressure I'm under to commercialize this technology, because I'm a 7-year bootstrapped entity. I have no external money into this business. So the pressure on me personally, financially, are significant. Now, the researchers need to understand what the ramifications are of the slowdown or the delays or the other bits and pieces. And they only see that if they sit at the table and hear the pressure I put myself under by putting a board around me who I listen to and get advice from. Unfortunately, people like Andy then have to be the filter between me and the researchers that need to finish and keep the integrity of their research process. That's really important to me as a founder, that everybody in the company is aligned, because I can't afford to pay the wages of the top end of town. And people that are motivated by money are probably not the right people to come on a journey with a startup like ours, which is quite altruistic. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to attract people like Andy to come and work with us, because he could get a far higher payday in another world, but he's on the journey with us. And that's why that friendship and cultural alignment are important to me, because when it's tough, they stick around because they believe in the purpose of the business. Now I'll probably hand over to Andy to give you an answer on how he's been able to manage and work through this with researchers on the tools.
Over to you, Andy.
When I came in, because everything was already set up. So the agreements were in place. Everyone knew what the journey was and what each other needed. So that was easy. That can quite often require a little bit of negotiation to get right, but that was set in place. But what I need to do is make sure that I have regular contact with the researchers. So you've got the thing you'll find in a university when you have a really good research leader, they get really busy. They get really hard to make the time to see. So we've deliberately made time every fortnight. I just catch up with Sharath for half an hour. Sometimes we don't, if we don't need to. That's half an hour. It's very minimal, but that just keeps us ticking over, checking in. It allows us to foresee problems that might be on the horizon, or just give quick updates. Then sometimes you get a situation where you go, oh, I didn't realize that. We better do something about that before it becomes a problem. So that's a really good thing to have in mind. And then the researchers under them are quite often new researchers, and you need to sort of spend time with them and help them understand as well. So Sharath and I are really good at filtering down what the approach is, what the outcomes are, what the environment is, and we all get along very well. So being open and honest, and I think whatever issue we come up against, common sense always prevails. So even if it's different to what was in the contract or different to how you normally do things, just with people like Claire Russell and Sharath and Madhu and Cam, we would just go, well, what do we all think is the best thing to do? And we do that. That's generally how we proceed, no matter what happens. So common sense will always prevail. So if you're with reasonable people and you've got a good cultural fit and you get along and you can have a healthy disagreement at times, you'll get through it.
Yeah, that's great. And for people on the call here who don't know who Claire Russell is, because you all now are going to probably be wanting to call Claire Russell, and I'm going to apologise to Claire in advance, but it's important to know in the context of universities, you have the researchers who you'll engage with in the actual research project, but Claire sits in the administration of the university. Her role at RMIT is the Director of Research Partnerships and Initiatives. These people who understand the structure of the university, the environment that they're operating in, and are able to navigate pathways through or unblock blockages for you are really critical. So it's a nice reminder too, I think, that when you're engaging with a university, it's always worth thinking of universities as being made up of a very rich group of people who include academics, the researchers, the professors you often think of course, students, but also a professional staff who have deep expertise as well. They may not be academics, but they have very deep expertise, and often their deep expertise is related to the process of translation of research, the process of commercialization, and having them as your champions can be really helpful. So thanks for giving that great example, and I'm going to be interested to see how many calls Claire gets after this. Now, you've mentioned sort of some of the formal and informal mechanisms that you have in place. So there's the governance where you've got representation of researchers on your governance. There's the informal catch-ups, Andrew, you mentioned. But in terms of thinking about those structural places, things that you put in place and the mechanisms you put in place, what mechanisms have both of you put in place to ensure that there's mutual benefit, mutual learning, and ongoing alignment between partners?
I think it's somewhere in the grey between the formal and the informal and Andy touched on it before, it's that alignment and the ability to have an open conversation about what our ambitions are. And from the outset, the ambition of Madhu and Sharaf was that their fundamental research breakthroughs actually moved and had real world impact. You know, RMIT calls themselves an impact university and they live it. They genuinely live that. So with all of us aligned going, I'm commercially benefited by getting a product out in market. I mean, that's why you do this. There's no hiding from that. Industry's there to get a return. We risk, and our issue sometimes with the research sector is they're probably not willing to risk as much as we are, but that's a reality, and we all know it going in. So from RMIT's point of view, they understand that I've only got a certain amount of runway of money, and that, you know, I'm not a never-ending, funding pool for research, and that by getting and helping me get a product to market, will fund the next level of research. So they understand the net benefit to them is they own a little bit of the IP or part of the IP of the base, part of the project. But by helping us get a commercial product in market, they also get, there's positive spin-off in that they get awards for themselves, recognition, government support, by helping industry. There's a lot they get there. But they also then know that there's a positive cycle that by helping us commercialize, they get more research, which has become apparent. If you do jump onto LinkedIn, we've just celebrated, and we'll come to celebration in effect. We've supported an ARC industry fellowship that just became successful with one of our researchers in Sunda. We are so incredibly proud of that, not because we get any direct funding. In fact, we're going to pay for the benefit of it, but he's going to be doing some research I couldn't afford and doing some stuff without any. This is what I love about the ARC and the relationship with the university. I can put a small amount in, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a small amount of money to support a researcher. But the net benefit to me is he can do research I can't afford. But if it does, well, hold on. We've now got a ticket to a much bigger game again. And that only came about because of a long-term relationship we've had and a trust we've built. So there's some benefits to them on that front. To us, I can't do this without them. If I went out to, the broad world in this space, there's no way I could afford a commercial research entity to do what has occurred with RMIT. So yes, it's going to be slower, but I've actually got a bit more control. I've got the right people, and I know that there will be a purity of outcome because they're not motivated just by getting their hand into my pocket as much. They're genuinely motivated by working towards a product that gets commercialized because of the mutual benefit amongst all of us.
That's great. And Andrew, from your perspective, having seen this.
One of the key things that we've done along the way is that we include the research assistants as well. When we go out and see a customer or an end user that we're working with, we give them exposure to the user of the product. And they generally don't get that because they're doing, they're in the lab doing, sensor development, but they get to see in an aged care home what people think of the prototype, what their needs are, how they are, what the environment is. Then that gives them that translation pathway of what we're trying to achieve. So including them in that side of the business is important for us. But I think it always comes back to the agreement that was set in place at the start. So the research team know that if they want to publish something, then it needs to come by us first in case there's something that's patentable. So if they publish something and it was patentable and we didn't get that opportunity, then we've lost an opportunity. They've lost an opportunity to benefit from that potential return of holding that IP. So that's something that can be difficult for researchers to accept because they want to be the first out there with this, high impact publication, on the first one, look at me. But if that's at the detriment of a patent, then, nobody wins in the end. So I think those two things are really important. And then it's that day-to-day sharing of information and contact. That's the real key. Because if you don't communicate, your collaboration is going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I like you both touched on both communication, but you've both touched on talent development really strongly. One is talent development for your purposes, but the other is talent development for the benefit of the research institution too. So for researchers, seeing the commercial use and the end users' need gives them a real sense of the value of their research. But of course, Cameron, you're touching on the ARC fellowship. It really goes to that being open and flexible and seeing the benefit of that come back to you. We've got a little bit more time left, and I'll just say to people, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'm going to keep asking questions because this is such a rich conversation, and I'm just going to change the picture too, because that's actually the people we've been talking about. This is the team here.
There's one person, Jane, on there that I haven't mentioned, and they're actually integral, and that's on the far right of your screen, a gentleman called Bill Manses from a manufacturing partner of ours, of this collaboration through the CRTP, a company called Sleep Easy Bedding Australia. They're based in Campbellfield in Victoria, and it was his team that was speaking to the fundamental researchers from the very first scoping session that really set this project off from the beginning, when he was able to say with his engineers and his manufacturing team, we love what you've done, but we will never make it that way in a true manufacturing facility. So he probably hadn't spoken about him, but Bill was integral in that first part of the development of this product.
That's great. And that also goes to that when you're engaging in a partnership, you're often also engaging in partnerships with other businesses as well. It's bringing mutual benefit to a number. And it's great. I love that photo. I have to include it. It's a great photo of the team. Though, Andrew, you're missing from that photo.
That was taken before I joined.
That was taken the day we announced our CRCP. We'd achieved we'd received a CRCP. So that would have been back in 2018, that photo, before Andy joined us.
That's fantastic. So I think well, I've got two more questions because I'm just keeping an eye on the chat and I can't see a question in there. So I'm going to ask you two more questions. The first one's actually following on from Andrew. You had mentioned that the agreement that was in place already when you joined has proved to be really important and valuable. I'm really interested to know, what are the important watch outs for developing an agreement? And Cameron, how did you approach that? I mean, you were new in this world with a research institution. How did you approach it? What kind of tips and learnings do you have from that process, that both of you, I guess?
Go with Andy first. Andy, what are the things to look out for?
Well, when I started, I was on the business side. So it was I guess I was representing the business in terms of, we need it to be commercially friendly. And I think for any researcher who wants to engage with a business, you've got to understand that the business partner needs to be able to have that freedom to commercialize the rights. And as Cam said before, it depends on how much you're putting in. If you've got more skin in the game, you'll get more ownership at the end, but you need those commercialization rights. If a university wants to have the commercialization rights or won't grant them in the way that you want them, then walk away. But then in CRC land, it was very different because all of the contractual things were sorted at the start. And you've got, I think we had 50 partners or something like that. Different projects have different amounts of partners and it can get really difficult to manage, but that's where you can fall back on those agreements. And then it's almost starting a collaboration each project that you have, because you've got new people involved every time. But Then what I found on the research side, the researchers need to be able to publish because that's how they thrive. That's how they advance in their career. So the business side needs to grant the publication rights. People need to be able to submit a publication to the industry partner. They check for confidentiality issues or IP or whatever. There might be a slight delay, but then you approve the publication. So the researchers get to publish, they get to use it for education and training, and the company can leverage the publication if it's positive about their product. So it's got to be a collaboration. It's got to go both ways. You need to each give a little bit to get the most out of it.
Yeah. And so Cameron, from your journey, the lessons in getting that right at the beginning.
Yeah, it's okay. So I started again, and I'm mindful of time. So I'm going to go succinctly because I've covered off a lot of it, and you understand that relationship is critically important. But I'll give you examples of when that came into play. Before I even got the CRCP, there was a fourth partner that we actually announced with. That partner ended up probably not, let's just say it didn't work out. But I went into an absolute freak out because I finally got this grant to get this thing going off the ground. And one of the partners has now blindsided me with something. So rather than hide, I picked up the phone and called Sharaf and said, I want to come and see you. So I went and sat with him and I opened up about what had happened. And he said, here's the pathway through. Bang, bang, bang. We called Bill, who was part of this, and this is the participants agreement for a CRCP, which formed the basis for our relationship. And Bill gave me the confidence because I picked up the phone and told them and showed weakness and vulnerability, and they backed me in, built trust. Now, fast forward, RMI team, they won't mind me mentioning this. They opened up in another meeting when it was just us and said, we've underscoped by a significant number in this CRCP. Bill and I looked at each other and said, we can't do this without you. We'll redo our numbers to get you to your number. So we forewent a significant amount of money. And I think the researchers went, oh my goodness, industry will actually give up money to put into the research process. And off the back of that, we built trust back the other way. So each of the ways along there, we've used the participants agreement from a CRCP as the basis of our legal framework. But it was always that transparency, be willing to be vulnerable and say, I'm in trouble here on this item. And that over 7 years, no one has let someone else down. And a lot of it's done on handshakes.
That's fantastic. We're running out of time, so I'm very quickly going to say a big thank you to Cameron and to Andrew for sharing their fantastic story. It's really interesting. I encourage you to hop on the Sleep Tight website to see all of the amazing things they've done and say thank you. I know it's a really valuable lesson for everyone thinking to engage in this space. Just want to say the next session's coming up. We've got an understanding the TRL, CRL, MRL journey coming up with Moban Nomvar from Samita. And then the next one after that goes to exactly what Cameron is saying is very important to get right. It's approaches to managing IP from idea to market with Jason Coonan, who has come out of the CRC. He's at Breakthrough Victoria now, was at the IMCRC. And I think Andrew may have been no, he was at a slightly different CRC to you prior to that, but has come out of that world as well. So thank you all for coming. Holly will make the recording available and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next session.
Thanks, Jane, Andrew, and Cameron. I think you're a really good example of a spin out not being an overnight success. It takes hard slog and really good connections and the right people to work with. So I reckon we can probably just squeeze in one question. We do have Julia Hocking. Julie, do you want to ask your question very quickly? Everyone else, if you want to stay for the question, that'd be great. If not, we'll see you in the next seminar.
Sure.
Julia?
Hi, Holly. Thanks so much. And I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. It's been great to hear. I wasn't expecting to go on to camera, but I thought it's friendlier that way. I was just wondering, so it's been a really successful university academic partnership. I was wondering if you needed to go through any regulatory processes and whether RMIT actually were able to assist you in that as well, or whether they did hand over at some point and that you needed to actually then go on to do the regulatory affairs side of things yourselves.
I'm going to answer the first bit and I'll let Andy get a little bit more technical on it as well, if that's okay. So they have helped point out the paths where we potentially needed it, but haven't provided the support around that, which we wanted to control anyway. It was actually us as a company that identified the markets we wanted to go into that had regulatory hurdles or barriers. So we brought in some service providers and we've tried a few different ones over the journey until we found those that fit us culturally, but they've always been part of that journey and understanding. So it's been more navigated by us to bring those additional regulatory partners to the table, but a lot of it's been identified in collaboration, and they look for the blind spots. So we bring an industry knowledge and a sector knowledge. They bring a research knowledge. Andy, do you want to add to that?
We've actually got a grant at the moment where we're transforming or translating one of our technologies into a medical device and just going through that pathway. The sector that we're in, there's almost a line where you can do something up to a point, and then after that, you have to have that regulatory approval. So we're on that journey, and we're using that information to help our commercial trajectory as well, because there's certain stage gates, if you like, and that's something that is important, that the importance of stage gates for relationships, but stage gates for the regulatory process around, if we want to have certain features in it, then it's going to be this trigger and this pathway. And it's just a time and money and a documentation thing. And it's all about the risk of your product if something goes wrong. Sharath and Madhu have a good understanding of what's needed, but we need to work with a regulatory partner to actually help us with the filing and the actual due diligence and the process of doing that. So yes, we're doing both.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, no, that's useful. And also it will be useful the other way for in the relationship for the academic partnership to learn that sort of process and what industry has to go through, as well as being able to work with you on the product. Thanks so much for answering that.
Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Julia.